So the next thing is to transition. So that tidies up the notion of suffering. We will return in the analysis back to suffering, but not in this section, in subsequent sections. What I wanted to do in this section is to start to build multiple narratives, right, and not just from Nietzsche's text. I want to incorporate the idea of suffering. Now we're going to take the idea of suffering a little bit deeper, quite a bit deeper, right? Take this idea of suffering, combine it with the idea of oppression and this dialectic, this war, this back and forth, this give and take, in an attempt to understand what the will to power is. We are almost complete. We've almost completed all of book 1. We're probably 12 hours into the lecture at this point. Pretty soon we're going to surpass the amount of time that I've spent on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So the point is, well, what is Nietzsche think? What does he think? We know what he thinks with respect to sort of this critique of nihilism. We know what he thinks with respect to this idea of pessimism and the discouragement that unfolds or ensues, historically speaking, especially throughout the history of European nihilism, when our highest values collapse. But what is this notion of will to power? And in order to get a sense of what this notion of will to power is, I ask that you guys turn to 86 in the notes. And I want to read a part of this, and then I want to return to the notes, because what I've done is, it's really, really dense. The note is itself not the easiest note to make sense of. I spent quite a bit of time going through the note just to make sure that I had a full understanding of it, and I decided to do a pictorial representation of the note. And the reason why I'm doing this is because you can tie this concept in, right? A lot of people accuse Nietzsche for many, many things. What I don't think people recognize is the sense in which Nietzsche could be used, which is how I'm presenting Nietzsche. I'm trying to offer a novel, a new contribution to the interpretation of Nietzsche's text within Will to Power. How you can effectively use Nietzsche's analysis combined with other scholars to talk about liberation theory. He doesn't talk about it necessarily himself explicitly, right? And I'm not trying to add anything to the text, but it's definitely there in the text. The thing is that it's so deep in the text, it's so opaque, that it's difficult to really pull out semblances of meaning, and that's why I'm really, really spending as much time as I am making sense of Nietzsche, because I want to see what I can get out of this text, right? So note 86, it's sort of like the second paragraph, or second sentence in the paragraph in the note. If you're using the Walter Kaufmann and following along, it's on page 53. It starts without wishing. Okay, without wishing to admit to itself what freedom is. And did I skip the first? Actually, let me start with the second sentence. I'll just start with the second sentence. For all his robust idealism and the will to truth, he did not dare to liberate himself from the illusionism of morality that speaks of freedom. So we sort of know what that means, right? Without wishing to admit to itself what freedom is, the second stage of the metamorphosis of the will to power. So now we're talking about the will to power, right? The second stage, and he sort of presents it in an inverse order. But instead of saying the first and then the second, he starts with the second, then he talks about the first. But anyway, without wishing to admit to itself what freedom is, the second stage of the metamorphosis of the will to power for those who lack freedom. On the first stage, one demands justice from those who are in power. Okay, so now let's read it sort of in context. On the first stage, one demands of the notion of a will to power. So now we're really getting to the crux, right? Nearing the end of book 1, it's going to get way, way, way deeper. But at this sort of introductory surface level, we're starting to make sense of what this idea of the will to power actually is. And he's saying that on the first stage, one demands justice from those who are in power. Okay, so rather than just go through and read, I want to stop and I want to refer to the notes and refer to the picture sort of simultaneously. And you know, you're going to have to forgive me because this is going to be very, very tedious. The lecture is at this point going to get only more and more tedious because there's a lot of detail and we can't just read through it quickly and try to sort of, using this metaphor, ingest it, you know, in these sort of bite-sized bits. What we need to do is make sure that those bits refer to concepts that we can understand, that we can make sense of, and then we can look at the sort of the holistic account. So, first point. So I'll write it out and then I'll draw a part of the picture. On the first stage, one demands justice from those who are in power, right? So justice from those who are in power. Okay. So justice from those who are in power. What are we talking about? From, right? We're receiving, right? So we're receiving something from those who already have power established, right? So again, to turn to the text to make sure that we're quoting him properly. On the first stage, one demands, so we recognize that it's a demand, right? And there's an individual. So if we were to represent, and I'll represent it probably over here, section envelope piece. If we are going to represent this pictorially, on the first stage, one demands justice from those who are in power. So somebody wants something from those who are in power. So as you can see, visually, we can represent this by power. Oops. Hopefully this, actually that's not going to be big enough. Let's do it down here. So there's the institution of power, those who have power. And we want justice from. Right? And that's the first point. That's the first bullet point. So justice becomes the first thing. Alright, so the first thing that we want is justice from, and whom do we want justice from? From those individuals that are already in power. Okay, on the first stage, one demands justice from those who are in power. It makes sense. Individuals making a demand of justice from those who are in power. Okay. Next point, second. On the second, looking from the notes on page 21, on the second, one speaks of freedom. That is, one wants to get away from those in power. So let's read it again. On the second, one speaks of freedom. That is, one wants to get away from those in power. So if you look at the image, whom might we be talking about, right? If we're talking about individuals who want justice from power or are trying to escape power, the only individuals that we could be talking about are those that began this section of the analysis. The sufferers, the powerless, the objectified, the dehumanized, the whatever, you know, you fill in the blank, right? So we're talking about the powerless. Remember, as I said in the beginning of the lecture just a couple of minutes ago, when we're talking about representatives representing the suffering of individuals by using these big showy words, the problem with evoking these big showy words is that it doesn't appeal to, right? It doesn't appeal to the justice from the powerful. Listen, you might be able to say, in a sense, something along the pejorative lines of, don't you see, as a representative to those in power, don't you see that they are suffering, that they need, it's sort of this us-them dichotomy is preserved, right? Because as a representative, if I am a representative and I'm representing individuals who are powerless, then it's not me that's powerless, right? It's them that's powerless. So in referring to their powerlessness, in referring to their suffering, I'm referring to, I don't intentionally do it, and this is the point, right? It's not that I'm intentionally demonizing. This is, I don't want to get semiotics, but this is sort of one of the constructs of our language, that if I am myself not experiencing the powerlessness or the impoverishment or the suffering of those that I represent. When